Hi friends, we're here to talk about pages 600 to 700 in Vanity Fair. This is our next to last video. We're sitting a little off center here today because the cat's asleep on the couch next to us. So I decided to dip into John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress to read the Vanity Fair section for myself, because now that we're nearing the end of the novel, I'm kind of interested in how much of a parallel there is. And I'm sure that Thackeray took a really close look at this himself and was thinking about it as he wrote the novel, obviously, because he titled it after this section of the Pilgrim's Progress. So I thought I would start out by sharing a few details from that section of Pilgrim's Progress. So Brad finished the book already, which I was really mad about.
I had a lot of driving to do just to get ready for the holidays, and so
you were listening to it on audio. So I told him not to spoil it for me because I have 100 pages left to read. So I thought I would just share with you some passages from the Pilgrim's Progress so we could talk a little bit about the parallels here. So the fair is no new erected business, but a thing of ancient standing. It's in a town called Vanity, therefore Vanity Fair, and the two characters, Christian and Faithful, have to pass through this town on their way to the Celestial City. Bunyan describes them as honest, good men, and so they come into this town of Vanity. They are not interested in buying anything there. It's a fair wherein should be sold all sorts of vanity. It should last all the year long. At this fair are such merchandise sold as houses, lands, trades, places, honors, preferments, titles, countries, kingdoms, lusts, pleasures, and delights of all sorts, etc., etc. At this fair there is at all times to be seen jugglings, cheats, games, plays, fools, apes, knaves, and rogues, and that of all sorts. So that's how he describes it. And then here are to be seen too, and that for nothing, thefts, murders, adulteries, false swearers, and that of a blood-red color. So these two men, Christian and Faithful, come into the town of Vanity, and it's ruled over by Beelzebub. They're just not that interested in what's to be sold there, and the people at the Vanity Fair, mock them, and then when they don't get anywhere doing that, they get kind of upset. Because, I mean, presumably you can think about a lot of instances in real life where somebody who's behaving properly makes everybody else look bad, and that's kind of what's happening here. So they were made the objects of any man's sport or malice or revenge, the great one of the fair laughing still at all that befell them. It says they beat them pitifully and hanged irons upon them and led them in chains up and down the fair. And in the end, there's a trial. And I just want to read you this quick little passage that talks about why they're making everybody there so angry. So first of all, they're strangers to one another. They're dressed strangely compared to the people in Vanity Fair. They don't really understand each other's speech very well, so they're different. And then it says, thirdly, but that which did not a little amuse the merchandisers was that these pilgrims set very light by all their wares. They cared not so much as to look upon them. And if they called upon them to buy, they would put their fingers in their ears and cry, "Turn away mine eyes from beholding vanity," and look upwards, signifying that their trade and traffic was in heaven. One chanced mockingly, beholding the carriages of the men, to say unto them, "What will ye buy?" But they, looking gravely upon him, said, "We buy the truth." And so they're accusing these people of being liars and cheats and frauds and all kinds of things. The names of the three witnesses at their trial are envy, superstition, and pickthank, which the footnotes say means somebody who's always flattering someone else, like false flattery. So you can see why these characters, Christian and Faithful, upset the people in Vanity Fair, and eventually they torture and murder Faithful, but Christian gets away, basically because God spares him. So I'm thinking at the end of this 700 pages, which takes us through chapter 59, I'm thinking about Amelia and how much she's suffered. And in fact, I think Thackeray keeps using the word suffering to describe her lot in life, and I'm thinking, okay, so there are two possible outcomes for her. She's either Faithful, who ends up being tortured and murdered and then taken up to heaven, or she's Christian and she's going to make it through. And I'm really not sure which one, except to say that she has been very faithful she's so faithful to George, like foolishly so, because he wasn't worth it. And she's so faithful to him that even when Dobbin comes back, she tells him, I could never love anyone but George. You know, you're thinking, really? Come on. It's been how many years now? 10 years, I guess. Something like that,
Something
right?
like that, yeah.
How old the boys are. They're at school. She's not going to let him in.
Well, and what I find particularly endearing about her is she seems to just sort of respond with tears to everything.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's something so devoted and
Faithful.
like faithful and like simple-minded in a really good way about her that I kind of like. And I think that if you want to be sort of a cynical 21st century reader, she seems like a really weak person. But there's something about her that is really consistent and really good and
pure.
Yeah.
And so when these characters in Vanity Fair, in the Pilgrim's Progress Vanity Fair, say, we're only interested in the truth, you know, you can kind of see how that might apply to her. And also to Dobbin. But really, everybody else in the book, you can see all of the terrible mistakes they've made and the things they've done. And another thing, actually, that's interesting is there are sort of some in-between figures in here in Pilgrim's Progress. People who live in Vanity, but who stick up for the two prisoners.
Oh, okay.
They were made a spectacle to all the men of the fair. There, therefore, they lay for some time, and were made the objects of any man's sport or malice or revenge, the great one of the fair laughing still at all that befell them. But the men being patient, and not rendering railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, and giving good words for bad, and kindness for injuries done. I mean, you can't help but think of Amelia when you read that. Some men in the fair that were more observing and less prejudiced than the rest began to check and blame the baser sort for their continual abuses done by them to the men. And then that only makes the others angrier. So it's not as if everybody is falling on them and you know, abusing them. There are some people who live there who are a little bit more, well, he says observing, like they're a little bit more discerning and a little bit more careful with their reactions to them. And so again, like you can think about the characters in Vanity Fair and kind of say, well, there's somebody like Becky who's just out and out, doesn't care about anybody else. She's completely vain. And then, you know, like, I don't know, Rawdon, I'm feeling kind of sorry for him. He loves his son so much. It's very much like what happens to Amelia. He has to give up his boy.
And he comes to recognize Becky's depths. You know,
and he leaves her. He does, you know,
because earlier on they had sort of were working as a team. You know, and now he's just, I can't do this.
So he seems like maybe he's one of those kind of in between characters who's more discerning and is, you know, finally catching on and saying, okay, this is not right.
Whereas you get like Lord Stein, where he goes, there's brimstone and treacle tracks on the ground.
And he also is the one who then steps in and instead of, you know, getting in a duel so slyly, gets Rawdon this appointment he gets him out of the way. He gives him a good, you know, good position. And
kind of gives Rawdon his self back, right? I mean, Rawdon,
in a way.
You know, like Rawdon seems okay.
Don't tell me anything I'm not supposed to know.
No. Rawdon seems okay with the appointment. He doesn't seem to feel that he doesn't deserve it.
Right. So anyway, I just think it's interesting. And then something about part 2 of The Pilgrim's Progress, you said Christian's wife.
When she passes through Vanity Fair, she gets bogged down there while raising their children. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing because particularly in these chapters, we have the return of Dobbin and Joss. And the men in these chapters, there's a lot of physical movement, but the women don't really go anywhere in here. And that struck me when I was listening to you talk about Pilgrim's Progress.
That his wife gets stuck. But it's not just that she gets physically stuck. She gets stuck in a world of vanity. And you could see that's true, actually, of Amelia as a mother, too.
Well, that's
She's
what I'm
quite
saying.
vain about her child.
Right.
And even when he's behaving very badly, she's vain about him. And yet, you know, can you say that she's really not pure? I mean, she's still a pretty pure character. There's a chapter titled Eothen, which is, again, I'm just using footnotes, from the East. and that's the return of Dobbin and Joss. Almost as if they're like
it's like the three wise men or something.
Yeah, it's just like this big turning point when they come back from the East after 7 years. I think it said something 8 years. That's quite a grandiose title for that chapter, and I almost felt as if I was at a turning point in the book. That now that those two have returned, now everything is about to play itself out. And as long as they're not in the picture, the story's not going to conclude itself.
Well, part of what I found really interesting about their return was how much they don't know about what has happened in the 10 years.
Yeah, I was surprised Joss didn't know his mother had died.
Right, and so that kind of allows the plot to lurch forward. Right, because there are sort of these revelations and action happens as a result of it. But the other thing that I thought was kind of cool was Dobbin like rushes back into the city, sort of as expected, and Joss buys new clothes as expected,
and does not rush at all.
And does not rush. He stops at every inn to eat, and it's comic how much he eats. But then towards the end of the reading, he really helps out.
Well, because Dobbin convinces him to. Because Dobbin's like, if I can't get what I want, I'm going to make sure that she is set up for life. Her brother is perfectly capable of taking care of her. He just hasn't bothered to. Like, what a jerk.
But he hasn't even seemed to like have the capability to understand.
It hasn't even crossed his mind that, well, because he has no idea that they're living as tenants in this kind of terrible house. I didn't realize how terrible it was until she leaves, and then it talks about how nasty the landlady was to her. I kind of missed that earlier. The young woman who lives there was really attached to her, but the mother was always hounding her for the rent, and they have a different reason for not paying their rent than Becky and Rawdon always did.
Right.
So, Joss is perfectly capable of taking care of her. It's just almost like he's clueless.
Right. Well, I think there's a little redemption for him. The other person I think who starts to make that shift is Rawdon. We talked a little bit about how he steps away from Becky. I have to say, maybe my favorite moment in these 100 pages is when he throws the jewels at Stein. And scars the guy for life right there. And you're just like, okay, Thackeray, that's
and
a
then
nice
the French
touch.
maid picks them all up and takes them with her.
And she just rips them off.
She basically takes everything that's not bolted down.
Right, it's like a Grinch moment.
Yeah. What did it say? She didn't take the chimneys, the glass chimneys from around the candles, and there were a couple other things that she just couldn't take because they were too big. And then she goes off to Paris, right, and lives a long and wonderful life and says, oh, England was so terrible.
Yeah. Well, and then meanwhile in this, we have Becky just sort of like falls out of the orbit at the end of this reading.
Well, I assume we're going to see her come back around because the novel can't end without us seeing her. Don't say anything. I'm just saying. Just saying. You know what strikes me kind of funny, though, is that as we're delightedly retelling the story about the French maid, stealing everything, and we've often done this talking about Becky, too, like, it's so delightful to read. And it's not as delightful to read the sections about Amelia. And in fact, the narrator even says that at one point, like, oh, I'm not going to belabor this because it would be really boring and terrible to read. And it's true. It's so much more entertaining to see the bad behavior than it is the good behavior.
Because Vanity Fair is fun.
Yeah, it almost incriminates you as a reader. It's almost as if as we're reading, I mean, we're in the book Vanity Fair, but it's almost like we're literally in Vanity Fair as we're reading, and we're delighted by all of the terrible things that happen, and I guess we better get ourselves out of it. So, 100 pages to go. We'll be back soon.